welcome to the channel. I am Oliver and this is Code Uncomplicated. Today we're going to be looking at Spark streaming and we'll look at the basic concepts you need to know to get started with Spark streaming. So now an easy way to understand Spark streaming is to compare and contrast it with Spark batch processing. So under the hood, what Spark streaming does is basically micro batches. Next, we'll have to look at a few concepts that are specific to the Spark streaming model. And then finally, we'll tie it all together with code. So let's get to it. So now in the Spark batch processing model, you can logically think of it as a single table with a finite set of data. You may run a few transformations on that, and then finally you write the output, and that's the whole life cycle. In the Spark streaming model, the life cycle of your program is a lot longer. So the table keeps getting updated. You have addition of values as well as you can have modifications. Now, every time we query the table, the output is essentially a snapshot of the data at that point in time. Let's look at the next diagram that explains it a bit better. This is right out of the Spark documentation. So here you see we have 3 points in time. And the technical term for this in the Spark streaming model is called a trigger. So, and that is something that we choose. So we configure how often to trigger an output. So over here you see every time we trigger an output, it is basically a snapshot of whatever data existed at that point in time. Next, let's jump right into the code and see how different or similar the Spark batch processing and Spark structured streaming models are. So here I've already set up some code to read a CSV file. So the data set I have taken from Kaggle datasets. It's a good source of open source datasets. So it's a simple salary data set. I've specified the schema over here on the top. And what else? And I'm just doing a simple aggregation, counting the total number of entries in the file and taking the mean of the total pay. So nothing fancy. Let's build it and execute. So as you can see here, I've just done a dot show for now. Let's see what happens. Let us execute it with a Spark submit. That's it. So that's the count and total pay. Simple enough. Now let's go and modify this into a Spark streaming application. So the first change we need to do here is when we create the Spark context. So it's not only read now, it is read stream. Everything else remains the same. The next thing is the show. So now the show will not work in the streaming model. So we need to get that commented out. So the next change we need to do is getting our output. In total sal dot write stream we need to do. Then we need to specify a format. So by default, there are a few built-in formats. I think there's a file you can write to, a Parquet file, you can write to a Kafka source. Today I'm going to be showing you this with console just for the sake of explanation. We'll probably get into formats and output modes in a different video. So let's do this as console, and then next we need to get an output mode. So output mode, there are a couple of output modes. You can specify complete, append, and I forget the other one. We'll get into the details in another video. For now, let's just do complete. What it essentially means is every time we run the query, we get a complete snapshot of the data. The next thing we need to specify is what we spoke about earlier, is a trigger. How often we want to look at our data. So it's basically trigger dot session time. Let's give it as 20. yes, seconds. And this is important. We need to start the stream. If we don't call this, it's not going to work. And another thing we need to do is keep it running till we terminate it, right? So pretty simple. There's two things we changed from our existing batch code. Let's compile it. Let's compile and execute it. But there's one more thing that we need to change. So what I did was, to explain this to you, is I split my data set into 3 files, as you can see here, using a simple Linux command. So the batch processing program ran on the salary folder. I essentially processed all the splits. To show you streaming, we are going to do the sal stream folder, and I'll keep adding one file to it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and compiled and built our code. Let's execute it. Okay, so what just happened here? We can see, since I said earlier, Spark streaming is nothing but batch processing. So it has gone ahead and processed an initial batch. And the code did not stop executing. It keeps running. Because the life cycle of the streaming programs is a lot longer. What it does periodically is keep giving us a status of what has happened so far. So as you can see here, it has processed one batch and it has incremented the batch ID by 1. Now let's go and copy another split into the sal stream folder. So I'll do data salaries. I'll copy B to data. So if you see here, let me just show you. Every time I'm getting the output, nothing's changing because there is no new data. Okay, it is still batch 1. Where's this? I need to copy it here. Now you see, now I have 2 files in that folder and there. So it got the new file, and if you see the output, it is now batch 1, and if you see, the count has been updated. And if we wait a while, we'll see even this batch ID gets incremented by 1. That's a noisy motorcycle. Sometimes I have noisy dogs, sometimes I have noisy motorcycles. Oh, there, it already triggered, so now it's batch 2. Let me stop this for now. Okay, so just remember that we went to batch 1, count is 999, and let me stop this. Now what happens if I execute this again? So over here we still have 2 files in the streaming folder. I've just executed the streaming job again. It started again with batch 0, so it's quite similar to our batch processing model. So what is the advantage of Spark streaming? That brings us to one of the most important concepts, is checkpointing. So Spark streaming gives us the ability to remember the state of our data, and that is done via checkpointing, and we've not specified that right now. So let's go ahead and make that change. So let's go make the change for checkpointing. It is specified by an option. Checkpoint allocate location. Okay, call it checkpointing. What I'll do is maven clean. Let me build that, and here is the data. Okay, I'm going to take out that initial file, so we have just one left there again. Perfect. Let that complete building. So it's done building. Let's execute it same as before. Okay, so nothing different. Again, batch 0, that's the count. I'll move one file folder into it. We have two. We'll wait for the trigger there, that's it. And now you see batch 1, that's the count. Now let's terminate this. Let me show in a different window. We have a new folder called checkpointing. You see, so if you're familiar with Kafka, it is kind of similar. So it just keeps a track of all the offsets. We don't have to worry about the details about this folder right now. The only thing we'll do is let me restart my Spark program. So you've seen we started with 0, went to batch 1, and earlier again it started with batch 0. But let's see what happens here. Now see, first of all, there's no new output because even though it got triggered, it understands. So we've used a file source. So the streaming model now understands that it has already processed the 2 files in that folder. That's why it's not triggered a new output. And if you see the batch's ID is still at batch 2. Now if I go and copy the third file, see what happens. Wait for the trigger. Yep, it's done. So we have 3 files there. It is started again with batch 2. So we had batch 0, batch 1, and batch 2. And that's the count. So that's the advantage of Spark streaming. So let's just recap what we've done. So we started with a simple Spark batch processing application. We needed to change the input to a read stream. The CSV part stayed the same. The aggregate part stayed the same. The output, we could no longer do show. We had to do a write stream. For now, we chose a console format and complete output. And the 2 important things that you need to remember over here is checkpointing and triggers. So trigger is when we want to take a snapshot of the data, and checkpointing enables us to remember the state of whatever our pipeline has processed. So if we did not have checkpointing, it's as good as a Spark batch processing program. So I hope you liked it. Wait for the next video. We'll get into more details about formats and output modes. And if you have anything that you'd like to see, write it in the comment. Thanks for watching.